This year sucked. Oh, I'm sorry. Hello everyone. Welcome back to the TJOmega channel for day 937 of daily content. Like that we don't care about that today. Oh my god, this sucked. Oh my god, this sucked. So, best toys of the year, we're up to 1990. This was the bad year. This was the bad year. In fact, next year is actually better because Hasbro didn't have any releases to make the brand look worse. 1990 is the dying year of Transformers. Not when it technically died, because there are still new toy releases, but all we had in the US was Microm Masters and Action Masters. And while Microm Masters were an initial success, it's not enough to keep the entire brand alive, and then we know what Action Masters did. Meanwhile, over in Japan, they're largely in the same boat, but they'll still produce a traditional Transformer here and there. So, it's rough. It's a really rough year. It's a really rough year. Not a lot of really good stuff came out. For this list, I had to re-examine, and I had to kind of like put myself in a completely different mindset. Let's get away from just saying, okay, the best traditional Transformer, and we're going to go solely off of how it is as a toy. What is its quality as something you can play with, regardless of transformation level or how traditional it is. We are only concerned with play value, not the form factor. So in that, we can work with this a little bit, understanding within its own capsule, most of the toys from 1990 are not that great. So with all of that said, let us begin the countdown of the top 10 toys of 1990, and we are going to start with some Microm Masters because there were some different things going on. Now, we know Microm Masters were kind of a way of Hasbro aping on Micro Machines, which were exploding on the toy aisle at the time. There was another toy line that came from Matchbox that was doing its own thing as well, called Connectables. Cars, planes, whatever, that you could dismantle into even chunks and recombine and assemble new vehicles from. So the front half of one vehicle could join with the middle of another vehicle and then join with the end of another vehicle. They tried to ape that for Microm Masters as well. And my favorite of the batch is the Constructor Squad. Largely because this team actually makes a whole lot of sense together. There are other themed teams, but the vehicles are all give you a little bit of variety. And normally, I'd prefer variety in this sake, but having all big, heavy construction vehicles and trucks means that played solely amongst itself, switching things around still kind of made sense. Not color-wise, but they still roughly made sense with each other when you start swapping things. So that made it a little bit more fun, and I just kind of overall like the color scheme and just, the play pattern that you had here. It's a fun little gimmick idea. It's a cool and neat thing for Microm Masters to do. And this is not a bad way of introducing yourself to the play pattern. Like I said, it's going to be a weird year, but it did give you some interesting options. So yeah, little fun, little swappable things. Completely harmless and not a bad idea. It wasn't enough to just ape the idea of the Connectables toy line, however. Hasbro also decided to integrate it with what they were doing with Transformers at the time, which was kind of relying on vehicles like it was a normal action figure line. So when it came to the Microm Masters, they had the bases before that transformed into battle platforms, etc. And that was all well and good. Building up an entire city of them, kind of fun. Now they were coming up with larger scale vehicles that the Microm Masters could actually interact with, and for these combining ones, that meant combining with those as well. That brings us to the Cannon Transport. So there were a few of these released to give you different options for artillery or battle emplacements, but this is the one I kind of like the best. I actually do like the colors. I mean, it's 90s. Can't really argue. Well, yeah, you can't really argue that. It's a very 90s color scheme. But you also have, I like the through path that the Microm Masters can drive through, like the full battle emplacement once it's transformed from the full vehicle. And I do like that it has 2 individual tanks, which kind of makes sense and works well. It makes for a really good, like, tandem pair and gives you plenty of options. I mean, this is, again, looking at play value. There are a lot of fun little options here, aside from just, 2 more combining Micromasters to switch things around with all your collections, but also just, yeah, a fun little way of integrating with the vehicle, and, they don't make bad little pilots for it either. I might argue the names of Terror Tread and Cement Head, but this is a fun little set. And for my humble opinion, I think it's the nicest looking set of this particular combiner transports they came out with. Now, because this is 1990, you're going to expect the Zone characters on this list, but you're probably going to think they're going to take up the top 3 because they're the only traditional Transformers that came out. You would be wrong, because we're talking about Sonic Bomber right now. Well, yes, it's an overall cool design, and the closest that we got to a Blackbird style jet for quite a while in Transformers. Overall, when we just kind of look at it as play value wise, there's not a whole lot going on. He's a fairly standard Transformer that happens to have something of an odd base mode for Microm Masters to interact with. It's not the most exciting thing. You hit a button, the yellow ramp goes up, Microm Master slides down, and it doesn't really look much of a base, So they were working it into the gimmick of the Microm Masters. Give them credit for that. The figure itself is nice enough. I like the design. You can definitely see where the aesthetic is transitioning to Brave, which is interesting to see. But it's overall nice figure, but nothing I would ever put in a top 10 in a traditional year. The best thing it has going for it is it's one of the very few toys that had an auto conversion system to it, in little bits here and there. It's not a jump starter or anything, but he's got some tricks to him. So for that, I'm putting him on the list, but admittedly, compared to the interactivity you can get from Micromasters and some of their accessories, it's kind of on the lower side. Looking at 1990 in a capsule means eventually Action Masters are going to find some way of working in here, even as just basic action figures with vehicle and partner accessories, etc., so we can at least get some working play value out of some of these, and as just more standard toys, they do have a place in having some fun. The one I'm picking for number 7 is Prowl, and I'm picking Prowl because out of all of these Action Masters that came with these little mini transforming vehicles, this is easily the best looking one. Number 1, it's a well-matched pair. It looks like Prowl's motorcycle. 2, the weapon emplacement it transforms into actually looks good. Some of these just kind of looked very, very shabby, if we're going to be honest. But also, the vehicle actually makes sense for the scale. That looks like the appropriate motorcycle for Prowl. When you look at some of the others in this same size class, this same assortment, you're going to see ones that, like a helicopter where the Action Master's legs are sticking out from underneath it, because it's just way too small. It looks like it looks like a kid's ride, kind of helicopter. Literally here's the seat, here's the blade passing just right over his head. It's a very silly. The most of them look very silly because they just didn't have enough space to work with. Prowl defies that. Prowl is probably the coolest looking one, and because he does have this nice overall play pattern to him that kind of makes both forms of his bike kind of fun to mess with, he makes it to the list, and the other ones will remain in obscurity. And believe it or not the only Action Master we're going to talk about. Popping back to Japan briefly, there are other figures that we do have to discuss because Zone was a thing. We do have some more traditional ones that we can go through, and that is going to bring us to Roadfire. Now, as far as the vehicle goes, I'm not sure what Roadfire is. He is some kind of tank. He's a very low to the ground tank, but he is, admittedly, kind of a cool little sci-fi vehicle. And as far as his base mode goes, once again, kind of absurd, but as just like a little watchtower platform, I kind of dig it a little bit more than Sonic Bomber, so he's getting to be a little bit farther up the list. And overall, yeah, I like the color scheme. I like the overall design to him. There's a lot of traditional elements to him in Transformers, and you can also again see where the Brave aesthetic is starting to come in. Yeah, it's just a nice little figure. Again, a little bit of auto transforming is a thing here, so he does have some of the more modern functions we've come to know eventually. But again, in a year where you kind of have to hunt and peck for the good toys, something like this again wouldn't normally make a top 10. In 1990, he is one of the best you got. Here is one from my childhood. Now, I never really got into the bases when it came to the Microm Masters, because you just had to buy so many of them in order to get, a decent looking city and get the play pattern working. And, there was just too much to buy, and no individual one looked cool enough. So it didn't really inspire me to get, a bunch of them. However, I took far more to the vehicles that transformed and integrated with Microm Masters, and for that, the Anti-Aircraft Base was the one for me. I really like this set. So aside from just a very nice set of combining Microm Masters, and I really like how Blackout's overall design turned out. He's a little bit atypical for a Microm Master. His head is a little bit more in proportion than his partners. But I like the beefier arms. I like the overall look. I really liked the idea. I really liked how the tank itself worked. I mean, it's a cool looking tank for starters. I really liked that design in the first place. And then just the way everything swings out into the battle emplacement, the ramp appropriately placed. It's got a little car for for an extra assault vehicle. There's a lot to play with. This is again where the play pattern for Microm Masters actually works. Some of these are a little bit goofier. A lot of them just laying up to basically a wall with guns. We're going to see one of those later in this list, actually, in a different place. But this is a childhood favorite, and I still like it. It's one of those I would love to go back and get at some point, but these things are expensive because there's so many parts and it's hard to find a complete one. But you know what? Yeah. I mean, for Microm Masters, this was a fun time. There was a lot you could do with this set, and it's one of those that I played with enough to actually decimate the toy. I'm one of the reasons why it's hard to find complete. But yeah, overall, just fun little set of things to mess with. I mentioned before that the Action Master vehicles had a hard time scaling with their drivers. Well, that's only if you went to the smaller end of the spectrum. There were larger vehicles as well that did far better at their job. So let's talk Gut Cruncher and his jet here for a second. So overall, if we're putting points into new designs for the Action Masters, I do really like Gut Cruncher. I think it works as kind of like a Decepticon counterpoint to Hardhead or Roadbuster. He's kind of like this, kind of like their take on the same design pattern. He looks good overall. I really do like the way Gut Cruncher turns out just as a design. But then you get to his jet. For starters, cool jet. I do like the individual jet. Once again, you do the thing that I liked from the Anti-Aircraft Base, which is to have a micro vehicle that can separate out and be its own little attack thing. That's kind of cool. The front end becomes its own attack jet. That is also cool. And then you get this massive weapon emplacement. Some of the other ones, even the Megatron one that has a lot of room for Action Masters, its weapon emplacement doesn't look nearly as cool as this one. I mean, overall, you're just flipping the jet upside down and using the same mounts for his missiles. So you're not doing anything revolutionary here. But what you are doing is just having a ludicrous amount of guns and weapons aimed at your enemies, and, you know, that's what I want out of a battle emplacement. Suffice to say, there is a lot for Gut Cruncher to do here, and if you've got some extra Action Masters, you've got enough for a small squadron to attack your Autobots with. It's an overall fun set. This is kind of like getting into like Transformers wants to be Mask, and this is where I think it works the best. Well, one more may be better, but for now, yeah, Gut Cruncher is a win. So how big did the Microm Masters stuff actually get? So we need to go all the way to the top in order to see what the best thing the Microm Masters did was, and that is going to be the battlefield headquarters. This one, it always goes back to semi-trucks with Transformers, doesn't it? Just inevitably, it always ends up back there. So you have a small semi-truck with a large semi-truck, and I kind of like how they are match set. A small one, a large one. It kind of works. I also really like this way that they have engineered this to where this is a ridiculously large vehicle for Microm Masters to mess around with. You got space inside the cab for 2 of them. You got space on top for them to ride and arm and, you know, man the guns. And then the whole thing becomes 2 different attack jets, which I think is a great way of giving you like play variety here. To go from big truck to twin jets is kind of cool. And the individual Microm Masters are cool. Again, we're in the combiner side of things. They are a nice little set, and it's not a set that's repainted from a previous one. So you had to get this whole big semi-truck in order to get these 2, and they are a cool pair themselves. So again, lots for a lot of Microm Masters to do. It's a really cool, really big set for 1990. I had got to experience it. I owned most of it for a while. Didn't really feel like putting it all together. Kind of miss it now. Kind of wish I had, because it's a lot of play value. And again, that's what 1990 is about. We are trying to find play value here, and for Microm Masters, this is one of the best ones. If we're giving Microm Masters their due with their absolute biggest and best, then we kind of have to do the exact same thing with the Action Masters, acknowledging that, yes, while it doesn't work like a normal Transformer, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. It just means it plays very differently. To that end, the Armored Convoy. It's an Optimus Prime toy in the US we can actually call Convoy in some weird shape or form. And once again, semi-trucks. We are back. So again, this is like one of your like epitomes of, the entire toy line. As opposed to Megatron's, his battle emplacement actually makes quite a bit more sense. You've got 1 central cannon, you've got 4 smaller cannons you can line up Action Masters behind to man. You have the raised seat. I will admit, the raised seat is kind of goofy because it looks like a theme park ride. It just looks, it's 2 seats with a seat belt and a gun attached. This looks like this looks like the alien ride at Toy Story Land it's a little bit goofy, but it makes more sense and looks way better than the one that Megatron had. And then you have the separate attack jet for Optimus Prime. Optimus, who does perfectly fit inside the cab of a truck. Optimus Prime driving a semi-truck. I think there's novelty to just the fact that that exists, if I'm being completely honest here. So again, good variety here. Again, trucks are fun to mess with. And yeah, if you want to drive the truck around, independent piece. Trailer itself does its battle base thing. Again, lots of play value, lots of options. That's what we're looking for this year. And of course, the Optimus Prime is going to deliver that. All right, if you know your Transformers, then number 1 is a foregone conclusion. There is absolutely no mystery to this. Let's go right into Die Atlas. The Autobot Commander for the year, the largest toy for Transformers released anywhere. This is yet another gigantic. What disguise are you referring to? Type of Transformer out of Japan, and again leaning heavy into the Super Robo aesthetic as opposed to the traditional elements, and that makes for a unique looking bot, and especially for an Autobot. It's very rare that you see an Autobot that has the wings behind the back aesthetic. That's actually kind of a rare thing. But yeah. The fact that the wings become a weapon themselves, kind of cool. The fact that there is a tank mode, silly as that tank mode is, it does exist. It is a thing to acknowledge, so we have to include it. And then, yeah, ridiculous jet mode, because it's really just a tank with wings. You know, I used to joke that if my online persona had a vehicle mode, it'd be this jet tank car hybrid thing, because I just kind of want to cram the 3 big vehicles all together. Atlas already beat me to it. Like, that's pretty much what Atlas is. What puts him over the top, though, is the fact that he does have a Microm Master base himself, and it's actually a pretty good-looking one all on his own. There's a lot of ramps going on here. There's a central tower. There's a lot of stuff I like to see when I have a play set for my Transformers. It's very cool that he has 2 vehicle modes that admittedly aren't very different, but hey, he's got it though. He's got them. Very cool looking robot mode, and then yes, a very fun place for the action for the Microm Masters to play on. And then yeah, the fact that it can also combine with the other 2 zone figures of the year gives you a huge Microm Master base. Whole thing looks spectacular, big power. It is ridiculously over the top as far as toys go. So yeah, I don't think there's any real question what the #1 toy of 1990 was going to be. I think if you know your Transformers, you knew it was going to be Atlas. No shock. Oh my god, that year. Oh my god, that year. So this was the one I was dreading the most because, yeah, Microm Masters and Action Masters. You would think the next year would be the worst because there are no American toy releases for Transformers in 1991. But this is where Europe comes in with brand new toys, and Japan is not quite done yet. They've got one last bang to go out on before we have to rely on Generation 2 in 92. So the next one should be a little bit more interesting. This one was a challenge, and I'm still not very confident in the list, if we're being completely honest. But let me know in the comments what you thought. If you got any memories of toys that I've left off here, please feel free to share them. And as always, I will see you next time.